Hey, Jim.
Hey, Rob.
So we are live, and for those of you who don't know Jim and didn't see our other talk, I recommend looking at that, and I'll have the link to that. But Jim Goddard is an old buddy of mine. We were just reflecting on that we're getting old.
How old we are.
Yeah, and we met in San Diego maybe like 30 years ago, something like that. And we had a lot in common. We had martial arts in common. We had sort of NLP and hypnosis in common, and just sense of adventure. And I don't know, Jim was a cool guy that I met, and just I think we bonded pretty quickly. And then he up and moved, and or he left, and that's a bit about what we're going to talk about today. And we talked about it a little bit last time, but yeah, Jim left San Diego to go on a crazy journey pursuing wisdom and enlightenment and all kinds of stuff. And then it was quite a few years later that we finally, I mean, we caught up online, but we finally caught up in Japan.
Yes,
where Jim lives. So why don't we start with this? For especially for people who didn't hear last time. So what got you to start on the journey? Oh, and I forgot one of the best parts. So after all this time and this great story and this great journey, Jim had this crazy idea to write a book about it. Or sat with an idea for quite a while about writing a book and just wrote it. Yeah. So you have the book? Why don't we show people the book?
I do. Let's see if it shows up with this
crazy
awesome system here. There we go.
Yeah. Can you read the title? Himalayan Reset.
Himalayan Reset. Yeah, Himalayan Reset. And the cover is really cool. So the cover I had made, an artist in Italy did this for me.
Wow, cool.
And it was so it's two things. One thing is it's patterned after the Vacation movies poster. The movie poster for Vacation.
I can see that. Yeah.
Yeah, holding up the dad holding up something. But on the other hand, it's also, for me, it's patterned after the old Zen story of the tiger and the strawberry. Oh, so being surrounded by chaos and danger, and focusing on and appreciating like one small fortunate thing, which in this case is a pen that works in the Himalayas, because I had this. Yeah, because I was always in search of a pen. When you do read it, you're gonna have a chuckle, because especially in Tibet, I was just always complaining, because I was always writing. I was always complaining about the lack of a working pen. So Tiger and the Strawberry. So
okay, so we're going to talk about two things, roughly speaking. We're going to talk about the journey a bit, and then the journey of writing a book. Mainly because I like to talk about what I want to hear about. And so I want to hear about both. And why don't we start with what got you, you're sitting in San Diego, you have a nice life. San Diego is very comfortable, beautiful place to be. What makes you go, hey, I got to hit the road?
Yeah. Well, actually looking back, and you and I talked a little bit before this, so I'm working on more books now. And what I realized in this process is that that the Himalayan Reset one, that's actually book 2 in a 3-part series. So San Diego was like the first stage of what I call my deconstruction. Okay. So I had constructed this life. Yeah, I had constructed this life on the East Coast. I'd grown up a certain way with certain expectations, and those constructs were arrived at in certain ways, and I built a life, or started to build a life, and then I just had this very hard reset instinct to deconstruct that. So the first stage is just shortly before I met you. So I sold everything, deconstructed, and got a motorcycle and came across the country and landed in San Diego, which is where I met you. And even there, when I was kind of still stewing, I thought there was, I didn't know what, but there was something more that I wanted to explore and accomplish. And that's when I went on the part 2 of the journey to the Himalayas. So
okay, yeah. And that takes a lot of guts to just pack up. I mean, you were relatively single, you didn't have a family, so that helps for anybody who's listening and wanting to do this who has a family. I have a lot of empathy for that. But so you had that, but it still takes a lot of chutzpah to pack up your stuff and go to the West Coast, and then pack up your stuff and take off for Asia. And
yeah,
I'm curious
what
got you to do that, or not what got you to do that, but sort of what gave you the chutzpah to actually do it? Because a lot of people talk about that, right?
Yeah,
and a lot of people think about that.
This is something obviously I think about a lot, and now I have two boys that are they're college aged. So, one thing that it's always nice to warn to warn the next generation. These are the mistakes I made. Right? Let me see if I can help you out. And I think one thing was realizing that maybe I got, for me, kind of serious about life and built a lot of infrastructure. Not easily movable infrastructure, kind of early in my life. I got serious early. And so that's one thing I warn my sons about is, hey, make sure you have time to get up and, travel Utah for a month, or travel Arizona for a month, or, see what the Grand Canyon's about, or the Black Hills, or South Dakota, or Mexico, or wherever. And so I think, that was part of it for me. I've always had in life this dynamic battle between the settler and the explorer. So, the East Coast, I was very much in the settler mode. And then, I went out the West Coast, I get that exploration out there. And then I felt like I was getting kind of stuck again. So that was part of it, the settler explorer. And I guess really also not feeling like I was succeeding in whatever way I was defining success at the time. And so I think really coming to an acceptance that, this is not working. It makes it easy to jump off and do something else.
Yeah, that's a huge point, because I think it's hard to pause and say, hey, however I'm doing right now, it's not working for me. And instead of dwelling on it or trying to fix it or something, maybe trying something else, not necessarily hitting the road. As we're speaking, I'm realizing that you have this, like you said, explorer or adventurer kind of archetype or that's living in you. And not everybody is like that. Other people's journeys might be more inward or it might just be down the road. But okay, so you did that and you went on this journey, and we'll talk about that a bit. And then you decided to write a book after all this time, or you started writing the book. So how did that happen?
Mate, I was always from high school, I was a wannabe writer. And what I found was, and I was told by my teachers that, I have a relatively good imagination and relatively good at storytelling, not so great at writing mechanics. Thing I struggled with, but I always wanted to be a writer, a published writer. Yep.
Sorry, it hesitated for just a second. So you said not so good at?
Not so talented at natural writing mechanics.
Okay.
So I was, so I felt, there's a difference between, being able to appreciate some beautiful music and being able to produce that music, right? I mean, I always felt like, I could look in and really appreciate, someone who's just a genius for prose. And I always felt like that wasn't me. So I've always been working to better myself in that. And the trip to the Himalayas was kind of my first step. I did actually publish a lot of travel writing after that. So this is like the anthology, but there were many like smaller magazine articles when I came back from there that I had published, including because Tibet at the time was really hard to get into as an independent traveler. It was very clamped down on by China. And so that in particular was kind of a buzz topic in the travel literature circles. So I was able to make some smaller publications out of that.
Mm. And that, I mean, just hearing that makes the writing the book task seem so much more approachable. The fact that you had kind of had some tests, they were, I'm sure, well received.
Yeah.
And that can, you know, just because Jim is being very humble, Jim's a great storyteller and, you know, and very entertaining, great public speaker. So I think, you know, the only question is, can that translate into writing?
Translate,
and,
yeah.
And
that's a challenge.
But if you were publishing articles, I guess it does translate. So what was different as you sat down to write the whole book?
Well, early on, truth be told, early on, I pitched the book as well. So back then, you know, I was like, all right, because this is literally 27 years ago. And back then, you know, self-publishing really wasn't a thing. And so I did pitch the book to some publishers who were in that genre. And you know, I wasn't getting, you know, response. You know, probably I didn't know a lot about pitch letters and, you know, how to approach it. And so I was not able to garner success for it. So I put it on the back burner. And since then, 27 years ago, like literally every couple or few years, I'd open up the file, I'd organize it, I would polish it, I would, you know, reword it, I would change things, put it away, you know, have a look at what the publishing field's looking like. Another few years, take it out, do the same thing, you know, maybe work on the photos, rescan the photos, recolor, adjust the photos. So it's been like
how much had you written up until that point? I mean, had you produced most of the book already, or just
I kept fleshing it out. Or? I did keep fleshing it out, but actually, but really, the last 20 years, I would say, was more polishing it and doing what you were referring to, is trying to. So while I was traveling, I was, you know, a very studious journaler, and then, you know, to take those, you know, relatively dry, factual, or just, you know, this was funny, here's why, you know, to change that into something that hopefully is relatively pleasant in a reading experience. So
got it.
Yeah.
And to make it read like a story, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay.
And you know, the other thing is like so now I'm in my office here and I have lots of books over there that I've been involved in publishing. You know, I've published lots of things, but it's all usually very dry, scientific, and factual.
Right.
So that's my usual. So this is, you know, it's really something different, which is why I enjoy it as well. So.
You know, when I imagine this book, because I haven't read it yet, and I did start it, I'm imagining, you know, kind of a series of pearls, because I know you drop these nuggets. Yeah. So that's how I'm kind of planning on reading it.
Yeah.
But in any case, when you sat down this time to write it, what was most challenging, or what was surprising, or did it just come out?
Yeah. Thanks for asking. So I think honestly, something that was a real inspiration to me, there's a fella I work with here. He actually, he's a part-timer. He teaches under my group, and he just published his 6th book on Amazon, and it's kind of a kids exploration, adventure kind of a thing, you know, for kids. And you know, he's just published his 6th one, and he kept, you know, because I knew I had to do this, and I knew it had to be soon. And talking to him was really making me think, yeah, I could do this. And I kept asking him key kinds of questions. And so once I put my foot in, like a year ago, I said, this is going to happen. And I started taking the steps, and I started like hiring people like on Fiverr, you know, someone to make my cover, you know, someone to, you know, design the interior, which I didn't know anything about, like how to
Right.
set pages and pictures, and maybe some people to touch up my pictures. I started like hiring off Fiverr, and I knew it was in a funnel, it was going to happen, and I've learned a lot. So
Wow. Yeah, I'm
yeah,
curious. I'm curious what questions you were asking him.
yeah. I was asking him like, well, even now, I'll tell you, I'll work backwards. Questions that I've asked him today or yesterday, like about marketing, or,
Hmm.
how did you do? Or, he told me that his first book, now we're all self-published, right? So we're
Yeah.
indie publishers, right?
Yep.
But his first book, he said his first 2 months, he sold 31 books,
Hmm.
right? And now he's doing real. I mean, on that book now, there are almost 500 reviews, just reviews on that
Wow.
book. Yeah,
That's amazing. Yeah, because I
yeah.
mean, I know a lot of people self-publish,
Mm,
and they may have had a bigger goal, but maybe it only sells 30, and that's fine because they wanted to write a book and they got to write a book, right?
mm,
What I find interesting is one thing that I talk about a lot in a lot of my talks and everything. It's kind of like what's the tipping point where a lot of people are sitting there going, I could write a book, but they
mm,
don't, right?
mm,
And I think one of the key things is
mm,
that they need some kind of reference experience
mm.
that they then go, I can do that,
Yeah,
right? And so you
yeah,
described there's this guy at work, or
yeah,
or
yeah,
our buddy Piat, who's
yeah,
cranking out books every week,
yeah.
and I had a buddy a guy I went to school with, and he was like, he had this strange job, but he was always like, oh, I could never be in business, I could never be a lawyer or something like that. He got a
Mm,
job, his whole job was copying legal documents. It was like documenting.
mm,
So it'd be a legal
mm.
document, he'd have to type it into a record system. And he did that for about a year, barely paying attention, just literally copying. And
Mm.
after a year, he kind of surveyed everything that he'd looked at, and he was like, oh, I get this, I could totally be a lawyer. And he went back
Yeah.
to school and he crushed it. It was like all of a sudden all these dots connected
Yeah,
that took him over that threshold. And
yeah,
it sounds like there's some of that with you as well.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was, astute observation, a reference example. I think another thing was like a handful of years ago, I did my dissertation, which is a huge book. And so I
That's a
knew,
book.
yeah, exactly. So I knew I could write a book. And
Yeah.
then but the challenge for me was thinking, there's a little ego there, is it going to be something that anybody would be interested in? Right.
Mm,
So this particular one is, I consider this first and foremost a legacy for my family, for my sons. Hopefully, there's well, actually, if I can read, let me see, if you don't mind, what I write to my boys here, to my sons, Yun and Caden. I hope the two of you make time for challenging adventures that inspire you to discover and nourish the towering spirit that resides in all of us. In life will arise from the times you avoided doing the things that were the most you, because those things were well guarded by the snarling beasts of doubt and fear. Seek and break through those fears to uncover the greatest rewards in life. So that
nice.
was the dedication to my boys. So first and
Wow.
foremost, that's what I was hoping for.
Wow. That's great.
Thanks.
And that, I was going to ask you what, I know it's full of lessons, but are there any sort of
Mm.
key lessons about that journey that sort of stand out, just so as a teaser for people?
Oh, absolutely, mate. So, one thing, so this is set in 1995, right? So it's 27 years ago. And so it was before the internet, before being able to, I had what, 10 travel guides, right? And, there's all kinds of stories of me just beating the street with travelers, just trying to find out, how do I get into Tibet, or, what's the train to here like, or can I really do this route, or is there still snow in the past now? And now it's just so easy. And back then everything was had to be word of mouth, had to connect with a human being, which is something probably people from our age are always feeling like that's kind of a go-to importance. But above that, in that pursuit, there was, for me, this feeling of becoming comfortable with the unknown, which I'm not a person who is good with that, right? I like to plan out things as much as possible. I don't like surprises in particular. And this journey, one facet of the journey, being totally comfortable with who knows what's going to happen, and I'm just going to have to deal with it. So that was one big lesson for me.
So you developed more of a comfort with that unknown,
like a muscle.
Wow,
just had to
that's
use it.
huge. Because from the outside, like, you seem like an adventure guy. I mean, I know a lot about you that people listening don't, but Jim's a diver. He's not just a diver, he trains divers, he runs diving excursions. So you're kind of an adventure guy. So it looks like you're just like, yeah, let's go, throw some stuff in the station wagon and go. But it's interesting to hear that wasn't always the case. Or
yeah, exactly. And you know what, and you bring up the diving, actually, and this is a big part of the development to where that is now. I mean, like a big part, the biggest part, if I had to distill my role down in that role as a dive leader or a dive excursion leader, it's a problem solver. It's a bunch of different problems: people problems, logistics problems, safety problems, condition problems, equipment problems. It's just one great big, like, I don't know what's going to come up next, but I'm going to deal with it,
Wow. Okay. So that was that adventure in many ways was the training ground for that.
Yeah. Another funny thing for me, and I'm pardon me, I don't recall some of the places you've traveled, but another thing was, and I don't want it, this is going to sound negative, but I want it to sound negative, so I'll put that out there, but kind of being a little less trusting about, so being in this context was, for me, one of the most intense environments where I was trying to be, in a small way, like financially taken advantage of. Right?
Oh my gosh.
I mean, you could kind of guess that anytime you took out your wallet, someone was trying to scam you, right?
Yeah.
That was the sure way. And I'd never run into that in life. And so that was a big learning experience. And luckily, I was there long enough, 4 months, where I could, I certainly had a pendulum that went both ways. You go one way, you don't trust anybody suddenly, right? You go through that for a time, and then, you swing the other way and say, all right, well, I can sort this out. And then, you come out of it, hopefully, with, I feel a more mature outlook on life, where, you understand, intently, I want to basically trust people and understand that there's a very real possibility that, there still have to be good fences for good neighbors, kind of a thing. You have to protect yourself.
Yeah, it's interesting. That's one of the reasons why people don't do adventures or don't try something new is, if they get stung once, their nervous system says everything is dangerous. And at that point, you have to start making finer distinctions, like, oh wait, no, this wasn't safe, but this is, right? And I had a funny experience. A buddy and I traveled to China. So we went to Beijing, we went to Xi'an, and we went to Shanghai. And we had never been there. We didn't speak Chinese. Luckily enough, people spoke English. I think this is probably like 2010, something like that. But when we went there, there was kind of a thing where you'd ask for a taxi, and the person you're asking would say like, oh yeah, just go over there. But then you'd see them talking to somebody, and then they would talk to somebody, and there was this feeling of, oh wait a minute, they're in cahoots.
The fix is in.
safe, or or is somebody on the take?
Yeah.
And in my way of thinking, like here in the States, if I find out that the hotel owner recommends something, I'm like, wait a minute, there's a side deal, and that's not considered sort of kosher. So my friend and I were really cautious about this. Even staying at a name place, we said, oh, where are the taxis? And we found out even at like the Sheraton, everybody got a piece of the pie, right? And so at first we were like, this is, oh, this is criminal, But after a while we realized, no, that's the way business happens.
Business.
There. Everybody gets a piece, and it's nobody's swindling you, but if they take you to a store, they probably have a relationship with the store also, which was something that happened a lot. But that's learning, right?
Yeah. No, the same,
oh my gosh.
Yeah, and that was the same kind of thing I ran into. And and what you're describing so is interesting because if for example, if you had your own free choice of what store to go to, then maybe the prices would be less because there wouldn't be someone who'd be getting a kickback from those. I don't know, but that's something I ran into as well. But some of the funnier things in here are like the scams, because some of them, once you learn to appreciate them, just, oh my gosh, the imagination, that is classic, like making fake government buildings or, fake government storefronts, like, oh yeah, this is the government train ticket office. Oh yeah, that's it. That's the government tourist stuff, which totally isn't, right?
Wow. That's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh
or just, but it's not bad, but they're just some really funny things, some really funny memories for me. Yeah.
And the story that we talked about last time. Yep. Oh my God, you're disappearing into the mountains.
Yeah, into the mountains. I'm gonna get some water here. Pardon me.
The story that we talked about last time was that some of what you went looking for, you didn't necessarily find at that time.
Yeah.
And that was one of the learnings. It was like, shoot, it wasn't there. And I won't give up the whole thing because they can listen to the first talk to hear that. Yeah. But I do have a question about this. You have all these things you learned on this journey. And I'm wondering, I was thinking about it, and I'm wondering what else you've learned from that journey now, 27 years later. You know what I mean? Because sometimes you look back on something and you're like, oh, I didn't realize, like, I'm learning that now on this journey. Or, in retrospect, I can see different things, obviously, right? With age. So
one thing, so you mentioned the search. And so I was thinking about, every once in a while on this trip, I would be approached by someone who was like a guru. And I remember I met this one fella, and I met him, and he was asking me to buy him a meal and stuff, and he talked the talk. He had lots of, probably he had read a lot of the 1990s new age searcher people who and what kinds of things they search for, and the kinds of lingo that was going around. He was knowledgeable about that sort of thing. And it's funny because we're here and having this conversation. He's kind of positioning himself. I just want you to know, I could be your guru anytime. So I was like interviewing my guru here.
Wow.
It was the funniest thing. And then at the end, when I was leaving, he says, well, anytime you need me for advice, I'll be here, like under the train trestle. You could just contact me. I was thinking, well, how do I contact the guy under the train trestle? And he said something like, oh, and when you leave, don't be afraid, don't be embarrassed to like leave some money on the table, and I'll see you around. And I remember thinking, at the time I was thinking, yeah, you know what, if my spiritual guru ever does appear in the future, he has to be much more financially sound than some of the folks I meet. Financial stability is a requirement, it kind of reminded me of how distrustful I am of how when money mingles with spirituality in any way, or seeking
It
or
does,
finding, or
right?
whatever you want to
Yeah,
call that.
yeah, yeah. And that's a whole other topic. But you're reminding me, I know this guy, and he went somewhere over in Asia to study mindfulness from like a top-notch mindfulness, like a Buddhist master.
Mm.
And he got there, and like you, he was sort of expecting Mr. Miyagi, and he was waiting for these pearls of wisdom, and
Yeah.
and he got there, and the guy, they basically, he got his robes or whatever, and they say, okay, and now we're not going to talk anymore.
Yeah.
And the guy didn't say anything to him, like
Gotcha.
nothing.
Gotcha.
And it was, it was not like we're gonna teach you a lesson, and it wasn't even like, oh, and then I poured water and experienced enlightenment. It was like, no, like your lesson is learning that just not talking, like that's a lesson.
Yeah. See, that sounds like a real thing to me. That sounds legit.
And it was really tough on him, I think, to sort of let go of, and I've definitely been there, like, when you hear like a great story, there's this aha moment that's very, it's a gratifying moment. Your brain goes, oh, that's so entertaining, or something like that.
Mm.
And just being quiet, sometimes it's a much more subtle experience. And I think he was looking for the stories, or the Dharma talks, or the fireside chats, and there was none of that. It was like, oh, go clean up the kitchen,
Yeah. Well, this reminds me of something, in that, I think that there are two camps of valuable learning, and that you can experience or you can witness. And one camp, and this might be the smaller camp, I don't know. There's the one camp where it just feels good. You connect with it. It's cathartic. It feels good. Yeah, I get that. But I feel for me, the bigger camp is discomfort. Right? Being faced with something that you're not comfortable with, hearing something that you didn't want to hear, or having a situation or an atmosphere or a knowledge presented to you that someone else who probably may very well know more thinks you need, and it's uncomfortable because it's change, it's discomfort, it's outside your comfort zone. That's another camp that's a tough camp.
Yeah, it's a really tough camp, and I think many people, myself included, when I started on my journey, I was equating, wisdom or all those things with like, oh, when I get there, it's just going to be easy. It's going to be comfortable.
Yeah.
It's going to be like a nice, comfy chair on Sunday.
Yeah.
And
you got to reach this plateau from there.
And I thought you could just leave all the discomfort of life.
Yes.
And get on the comfy chair.
Yeah.
And then, you do that for a while, and it's cool, it's comfy. And then you realize, oh, wait, all this other stuff is still like knocking at the door. This friend of mine said it's kind of like if you have he used this image. He said, it's like, imagine you have an uncle who's like kind of a drunk and really rude and crass and says the wrong things. And you can't bring him out during the holiday parties. So you lock him in the closet, right?
Yeah.
And nobody sees him. Yeah. He's like, but he's pounding at the door.
Oh man.
Right. And at some point you've got to invite him into the party.
You and I actually, our metaphor for that situation is incredibly similar. Please go ahead. Yeah.
No, that's
think it the same way. You can't lock the beast in the cellar for too long.
Yeah. It's like that. I think we've talked about it. That book Iron John, which in many ways is about, free the beast, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And how to relate to it in a different way.
Yeah. sorry. By the way, on this topic, so I don't know if you remember, you probably do, because I think I've posted about this before, but so I did meet the Dalai Lama on this trip, right? So
How was that?
yeah, well, it's a funny story. I think I won't totally ruin it here, but let's put it this way: it's anticlimactic because I had these
You had that idea.
expectations,
Yeah.
right? I'm meeting the 14th, incarnation of this, spiritual being, and I really thought, looking to this guy's eyes, I thought there was going to be this thing that, that totally
The
wasn't
moment.
there.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's
And it's a
and it's
great
funny.
moment.
I think sometimes that does happen and can happen. You know, I've talked to many people who they had interactions with their teacher at the right moment. And
Mm.
for other people, it's yeah, go clean the kitchen, and
Yeah,
that's what's needed. Or
yeah,
you find out that the Dalai Lama's he's a guy,
yeah.
you
He's a
know,
guy.
and
Yeah, yeah,
and he's a guy. He's also brilliant and amazing,
yeah.
and
Yes,
has done amazing stuff. But that doesn't mean
yeah.
that's happening every second of every day, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
Um,
Exactly, mate. And the context where I met him was, not it was not a personal, let's sit
right.
down and deeply chat kind of thing,
Chat.
right?
Yeah.
It was a drive-by viewing kind of a thing. We would shake a
Okay.
hand and shake a hand. Okay, next, give him a consolation prize down there.
Right.
It was,
Yeah.
you know,
It's funny.
yeah.
I've heard many stories, and I've seen it in movies where people are at book signings and they
Mm,
think, like they're finally meeting their dream author, and they think this is my moment where we're really going to connect everything, and they get there and they're like,
oh,
can
funny.
you sign it?
Yeah. Mate, you know what? You remind me, when I was young, there was a bank that was opening in my very, very small town where I grew up. Very,
Hmm.
very, very small town.
Hmm.
So this bank was opening up, and I don't know why they did it, but they invited an old football. Do you know Gail Sayers?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, Gail Sayers was there. And I was like, I don't know, 8 years old or something. I didn't know anything about football in general. I knew even less about Gail Sayers. And so here's something even the opposite. So Gail Sayers is there signing autographs. My stepfather was like a big fan of Gail Sayers. So he's like, yeah, you got to meet him. You got to meet him. So I'm going down this line. I'm there shaking Gail Sayers' hands. He's like, hey, little man, how you doing? I'm like, okay. He said, well,
You Dalai
like,
Lama him.
yeah. He said, do you have any questions for me, little man? It's like, in my head, I don't even know who you are.
Right.
you know?
Wow.
So
Oh
he was
my
probably
gosh.
just hoping for an interaction. So a little bit of the opposite there.
Wow. Oh my
Yeah.
gosh.
Yeah. But
Okay.
one thing, if
So
I could say, looking back, um, so revisiting this book was a fantastic reminder for me for the explorer,
hmm,
and my dedication for the boys in this book was probably just as much a dedication for me,
hmm,
remembering it. And what I wrote, what I remember here. So in the epilogue, right? So how long did the post-trip specialness last, you might ask? Not as long as I would have liked. I certainly traveled Asia a bit since then, but not as much as I anticipated, and certainly no more hard travel like in the Himalayas. However, this hard travel experience created a new baseline for comparison, which has lasted a lifetime. Even 30 years later, when warned about how difficult some random upcoming task will be, I say to myself, or aloud, how hard could it be? I hitchhiked across Tibet, for fuck's sake.
right.
But then, but then I might get thwarted trying to fold a fitted sheet or something similar. I guess every superpower has its limits. So it was a good reminder.
Boy, isn't that the truth? Yeah. Oh
Yeah,
my God. Yeah.
yeah.
So the next journey writing wise is to write the other two books.
Yes, yeah. So phase one is deconstructing on the East Coast. And I took it was a 2-month motorcycle trip across the country,
Okay.
landed in San Diego. So that's going to be book one. And book three is coming to Japan. Uh,
Great.
and that has a lot of humor in it because there are a lot of very funny, freaky things that happen to me in Japan. So I'm having fun writing those stories? Because some of them kind of write themselves. So
Yeah. Yeah. There's such a funny thing when you go to Japan that the way I would describe it is you bounce off of experience, right? Because things are just done differently. So when I went there, I mean, and it's not just me thinking everybody should behave like an American, but it's more just, oh, you know, in this situation you do this, and in this situation you do that. And I'll give you an example. And you know, my experience of folks in Japan is they're super polite, very courteous. You know, nobody's embarrassing anybody. And I had this experience when I was on a bus I was by myself, and I was on a bus in Kamakura. So I'm going from one shrine. Kamakura is the shrine town, right? So I'm going from one shrine to another, and I don't speak any of the language back then. I couldn't read any of the signs, and I had a guidebook, and I was just trying to figure out which stop to get at for the next one. So I did what you do in New York, which is I stood up and I walked up to where the driver was, and I said, "Excuse me, can you tell me when this stop is?" You know, as the guy's driving. And very politely, the guy said, "Please sit down." And being an American, I was like, "Oh, he's such a nice guy," but he doesn't really mean it, because in New York, you just ask again, and maybe a little bit louder. So I was like, "No, but I just want to know, like, is this the stop or is it?" And he said, "Please sit down." Yeah, exactly.
Oh wow.
Too.
Yeah.
And then finally, he said very firmly, he said, "Please sit down." You know, like, in probably the most firm voice I've heard from anybody in 20 or so years in Japan. And I was like, "Oh, that's what it sounds like." And also it taught me to pay attention to the earlier signals, because in Japan things are like, they're not going to yell something at you, but it's kind of like when you and I were running around looking for, I wanted to exchange my cell phone. I don't know if you remember this. My cell phone didn't have the English menus.
Yeah.
And so we went to the store to try to exchange it. And the guy's like, yeah, we don't have it. He's like, it's difficult. Right.
Yeah.
And then he says, "Can we call another store? Would you like me to call another store?" And I was like, "Sure." And he calls, "Nope, they don't have it. Would you like me to call another one?" And at that point, I think you knew where this was going, that this could go on forever.
Yeah.
And I didn't know that at the time, that, you know, in Japan, they will keep trying to help you.
Yeah.
Until you say, "Stop, please," like, "Please stop." So
well, the other early signal is, and this is a funny thing. So it's very quickly you learn that difficult is just another word for no or impossible.
No. Yeah, this will never happen ever.
Yeah, but they just want it, but it sounds more polite.
Yeah.
Because it's not an outright no. In fact, there's I forget the author's name. Was it Rick Barry? I forget.
Dave Barry. Dave Barry does.
Dave Barry, thank you.
Does Tokyo.
Yes.
Fantastic.
So he wrote a book, and one of my favorite lines in that. So he and his wife, I guess, were looking for a Shinkansen from city A to city B, and they were at a travel office trying to arrange that. And they were saying, "Okay, well, we would like to go to city A to city B on this day, this time. Can we do it?" And the guy's like, "Oh man, that's really difficult, you know." And they're, "Okay, well, we could change a day. How about this day?" Yeah, it's still difficult. And so they went through this a few times. As it turns out, there is no Shinkansen from city A to city B.
Wow. Right? Oh my gosh. Yeah.
So instead of just saying no, it's like, "Wow, that's really difficult." Well, how difficult is it? Impossible.
We would have to build a train. Yeah. Oh my god. Oh my gosh. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, that's why it's so rich, kind of getting in Japan and just bumping off the world there, you know, because everything's a little bit different. So
yeah. Do you know the other thing that you brought up? So about the guy saying no, What that makes me think of is, so what I find here, and it's something that I like to model and to think about, is, so chances are that guy, that energy that he was showcasing was just right from the core. There was no ego about it. There was like, I don't like you, or I like you, I don't like you. I don't like foreigners, or this foreigners, that. This is my job. This is my core function. You have
Yes.
violated that function.
Yes.
Here's my directive.
Right. This is what
And
we do in this circumstance. Yes.
yeah, and
Yes.
I love that. I love that. And because for me, it's a great archetype, because I think so often when we're thinking about, I'll say for me, when I'm thinking about doing or saying something difficult, I have all this ego and all these trappings that are distracting me from the core mission, which is sit
Yeah.
down. And I let those things distract me. And so one of the things that, that I do, like, if I know I need to have a difficult conversation with someone, maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a coworker or someone who works for me, I'll sit down, almost meditate, and I'll like center like as much as
Right.
possible. So when I get into that situation, hopefully, I have as little of this
The
as possible
wherewithal.
and more
Yeah.
of this.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. As we're talking about this, I'm remembering I was on a plane in coach, I think flying back from Tokyo back to New York, and they put me. I was in the third seat of 3 seats with literally like 2 football players, like enormous guys. Like this guy was so big that like half of him was on me, and and he asked me to, he's like, would you mind sitting in the middle? And I was like, yes, I would mind. I'm not sitting between you two guys. So so finally the stewardess came up to me. We're in the front row of coach, and business was empty. And she said, excuse me, would you be willing to sit in another seat in coach so that these 2 gentlemen can spread out a little bit? I said, sure. How about up there?
Yeah, good for you.
And she said, I'm sorry, it's not possible. Right. So Kekko des. And so for me, that was an opportunity to negotiate. I was like, yeah, but you're asking me, can I sit there? No, it was never going to happen. So I've learned that now. I've learned to sort of cave on those negotiations pretty quickly. Typically.
Well, that's interesting, because I think negotiation in Japan in general, at least at the consumer level, is, I think, relatively rare compared to other countries. And in fact, talking about the settler and the explorer and what things are like, as you know, because you've been here, anytime I take my wallet out in Japan, I have almost zero fear that someone is trying to swindle me, or is going to be dishonest with their interaction, or give me the wrong change on purpose, right? Or give me an inferior product, or
it would be unthinkable.
Yeah, no fear. And so what impresses me is when I've met Japanese people traveling, they either learn quickly or adapt, or they're not fish on the market to be chopped up by swindlers out there. They adapt really quickly, or somehow have this innate instinct. And I wonder how, because there's zero of that here. How could you stay vigilant against something that's zero? It's incredible.
Well, the only thing I can think about with that is I looked at my friend Shoko. I looked at her guidebook when she was living here, right? And it told a very strong story about what it was like to be in New York. And it had the neighborhoods color coded. And the neighborhood where I was living and where she was living was color coded red, which meant you might get killed.
Danger.
So
ultimate danger.
So all the levels of caution are documented at a much higher level. So I think they're coming in probably with more caution, and And then it's good. Then you back up from there and you realize like, okay, there is, like you experience, like not everybody's swindling me, but I should be a little bit cautious. So,
right. Yeah.
Well, this is great.
Yeah.
I am looking forward to the next 2 books.
Thank you.
Yeah. I don't know when, but I am looking forward to them, and I'm looking forward to reading this one. So I will put the links in. I'll put the links to the book. I'll put the links to your YouTube channels, because people should definitely check that out, and the link to the other talk that we did. So great seeing you. I hope I get to see you in person when things loosen up again. I've been trying since it locked down and just haven't been able to get over there. So
sounds great, Rob. Thanks for having me. I had a great time as always. So thanks for the chat.
Great. All right. Talk soon.
Cheers.
All right.
Thank you.
Cheers.